Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 644 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes the not-so-classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Monster Kid Radio, celebrating Nosferatu November 2023. We are deep into the month with some awesome vampire content here on the show that you are listening to right now, hosted by me, your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the band Los Vampiros del Mar. Do I need to say welcome? I mean, they've been here for the past couple of weeks, and they're going to be here again this week because they're playing the song Invasion from the Blood Planet on this week's episode of the podcast. Of course, they gave us permission to play their music from their album Songs of Blood, Death, and Romance, which you can find at losvampirosdelmar.bandcamp.com. Go check them out when you're done listening to this episode of the podcast. What are we talking about this week? We're talking about vampire movies, and I'm super stoked because this week we're doing one of my absolute favorite things, and that's showing a movie that I love to the woman that I love. My wife, Beth, you know, she's a haunted house designer, she's into haunts, she's into all things spooky, but there are some movies that she just hasn't seen, including Horror of Dracula. A couple weeks ago at Scare-a-thon at the Joy Cinema in Tigard, Oregon, she saw The Mummy, the Hammer film, The Mummy, and that was her very first Hammer film. We're going to keep the Hammer love going with the love of my life by showing her one of the absolute best, one of the pinnacles, one of the peaks of Hammer vampire, Hammer film, Hammer horror goodness, Horror of Dracula with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And it was a fun time watching the movie with her, and we're going to chat about it later on in this episode. Of course, no episode is complete without Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. Now, when he sent me the file this week, he included a note. Derek, it is indeed that episode. Cheers, Mark. What does that mean? Well, listen to his installment of the Beta Capsule review this week to find out what he is talking about. He's going to be talking about an episode of The Return of Ultraman, but that's all I'm saying. I'm not going to spoil anything. We also have Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland, another fan favorite segment here on the show. Also, we received a message from a listener of the show. This comes from Travis H. He sent this to me on Facebook. Derek, I can't wait to hear Beth's reaction to Horror of Dracula this week. Anytime there's a Hammer film, it's always interesting to hear people's reactions. I can't wait for the Yorga episodes, but I know it's going to be a little while. It's so amazing to hear about the upcoming trip to Kuwait. I'm not sure how long the two of you are going to be there, but you might be able to hop to Egypt to see some mummies, although there should be some in Kuwait. All right, so there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, this wasn't necessarily an email sent to the show. This was actually part of a private conversation that he and I were having on Facebook. Well, not so private because I just shared it with you here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing Beth's response to Horror of Dracula this week. The Yorga episodes, Travis actually asked me in a previous message privately if we're ever going to talk about the Count Yorga films here on the show. At some point, yes, I really do want to talk about the Count Yorga films and Deathmaster as well. The Kuwait thing. Well, as we mentioned last week and as we've been talking about on Facebook and such, Beth and I are going to Kuwait to help them open the region's first permanent haunted house attraction. This is something that I can't believe it's going to happen. In fact, this week's episode is a little late because there was some stuff that we had to get done, so many moving pieces that need to line up just right for us to be able to go to Kuwait, and we spent 8.5 hours on the road with dear friend of the show, one of my dear friends, Jeff Polier, to be able to do this. And won't get into too many other details, but I will say the reason the episode is late this week is because of extra trips we had to make to a particular office in Seattle to make sure that we could go to Kuwait. Anyway, yes, we're going to Kuwait, and you can learn all about it over at AmericanHaunters.com. I'll mention that again at the end of the episode as well, and depending on when you listen to this, there is still time for you to kick into the Kickstarter to help, us with our trip, to help pay off some things that we need to pay off regarding Wednesday, our cat who's going to be staying with my mother down in Arizona while we're gone for 3.5 months, and to gain access to the exclusive web series that Beth and I are going to be producing while we're over in Kuwait. There's other rewards as well, including maybe getting some of your very own sand from the country of Kuwait. Kuwaiti sand? You want some of that, right? Why not? Are we going to be able to go over to Egypt to see some mummies? Probably not. There's not going to be a lot of international travel when we're over there. We're going to be staying put in Kuwait. We're going to be working hard on the haunt, so there's not going to be a lot of time for those kinds of trips. However, we are going to be exploring the area, and I cannot wait to see what the Kuwaiti horror landscape looks like, if there's even such a thing. I've been doing a little bit of research, courtesy of Joseph Schultz, again, friend of the show, regarding some of the urban myths and legends and monsters and folklore of Kuwait. I can't wait to experience it firsthand. And again, the Kickstarter campaign can be found at AmericanHaunters.com. If you listen to this episode and the Kickstarter is over, well, still go to AmericanHaunters.com, because that will also be where we're going to be posting some of our adventures and talking about the trip and that sort of thing. Ultimately, it's going to redirect you back to TeamDeath.com, but in the meantime, AmericanHaunters.com. Make sure you go there. Anyway, why don't we go ahead and get on to the rest of the show this week. We've got Mark, we've got Kenny. The band needs a break, so I'm going to give them a break to the end of the episode. You got Beth. You got me, for what that's worth. You got all the monsters, and they're right here on Monster Kid Radio.
It's 1966. The space race is on. The Cold War is heating up, and giant monsters are destroying Japan. Daikaiju Attack, from award-winning author Stephen D. Sullivan. Now available in all ebook formats on Amazon, Smashwords, Drive-Thru Fiction, and other quality outlets, and in print on Amazon.com. Find more info at daikaijuattack.com, sdsullivan.com, and the Daikaiju Attack group on Facebook. Join the action today.
Hey, Satch, will you stop clowning around and... You idiot, I'm gonna give it to you in a minute. Did you call? Yeah, we...
The Bowery Boys become spook chasers, moving to the country to pad down in a creep joint that's crawling with creeps.
Linky, you need a shave. And a manicure.
Yes, the Bowery Boys are bowling up on skeletons in the closet. The spirits are willing to play until the boys uncover the hidden treasure in the dead gangster's hideaway.
Spread out, you guys. If there is some more money, let's find it.
I don't want no trouble with these jokers unless they ask for it. All I want to do is find the rest of the dough and get out of here.
Oh, Dookie, if I knew it was you, I wouldn't have hit you so hard.
Okay, bright boy. Pick it up.
Well, as long as you're that polite.
It's a hustle and a bustle and a tussle between the guys, the goons, and the ghosts right in the crazy middle of a haunted house.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Return of Ultraman, Episode 37, Ultraman Dies at Sunset. Original air date, December 17th, 1971. Be advised, there are major spoilers ahead. The Space Radio Wave Laboratory is serving as a front for alien Knackle. bent on destroying Ultraman. Well aware that Hideki Go is Ultraman, Knuckle begins a process of analyzing his strengths and weaknesses, unleashing various kaiju to lure him into battle, so he can learn his defensive techniques and weaponry. Meanwhile, Monster Attack Team is tapped to deliver a shipment of Saturn Z, a liquid explosive, just before the reappearance of tsunami monster Sigurath in Tokyo Bay. Ultraman emerges to block the tidal wave with a force field and destroys the sea monster's horn with his spacium beam, only to have former opponent Bemstar launch a sneak attack. Using his Ultra Bracelet, Ultraman quickly disposes of the hapless beast, but the aliens obtain the data they're looking for. They're alarmed. Ultraman is more powerful than they expected, and unsure that their boss monster Black King is strong enough to prevail, they look for one more weakness to exploit. They send Black King to interrupt the delivery of Saturn Z, and with MAT occupied, the aliens steal the explosive. But the most fiendish part of the plot is yet to come. Deciding that Ultraman's greatest weakness is his devotion to humanity, they target the people he loves most, murdering both Aki and Ken Sakata in a brutal hit-and-run. Still reeling with grief and craving revenge, Go transforms to fight Black King, but when alien Knuckle takes his final form, Ultraman endures a terrible beating. Claiming to have killed Ultraman, alien Knuckle transports his lifeless body in chains to the darkness of space. The events of episode 37 will come as a visceral shock to the unsuspecting viewer. From the first episode, the relationship between Hideki Go and the Sakata family has been at the heart of the show. And the decision to shatter that almost completely is a bold one, to say the least. Writer Shozo Uehara does a masterful job of magnifying the tragedy, making it clear that both Aki and Go are thinking of marriage, only to have everything collapse. It turns out the reason for the on-screen demise of Ken and Aki Sakata was entirely practical. The popular actors were being offered other work, and this was a dramatic way to free their schedules. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, however, as episodes 37 and 38 scored some of the highest ratings in Ultra Series history, catapulting Return to a new level of popularity through the rest of its run. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
M1 to CK. Docking maneuver completed. Link-up accomplished successfully. Starting rocket motors to continue flight. Over and out. Next step, Mars. 35 million miles away.
Mission Mars.
3 astronauts on a mission to the forbidden reaches of the Red Planet, defying the elements, inviting death and disaster. Darren McGavin, who gambled his life on a fantastic mission to a world no other living man had ever seen.
Oh, darling, I'm so scared.
Nick Adams, who shared the incredible odyssey, living an adventure beyond his wildest dreams. Mission Mars.
What the hell is that?
They met their destiny on a planet that time forgot. An adventure that smashes the barriers of man's imagination.
Watch out, the ball is opening! Help me!
Mission Mars.
The Brides of Dracula. Never before has a motion picture revealed so much of the mystical, the unnatural. The Brides of Dracula. Out of the unknown darkness he comes, the handsomest, the most evil Dracula of them all, bringing horror beyond human endurance to a fashionable girls' school. Who can resist him as one by one he seeks out his fresh, innocent victims? Who will be next to know his kiss of death as one by one he lures young beauties into the timeless, bloodless realm of the undead? Beware of pity, for he feels none. Beware of love, for none can refuse him. Never has the struggle between good and evil been so shocking and the outcome so uncertain. Terror beyond telling in color. The Brides of Dracula. Dracula.
You just can't keep a good man down.
This picture's been rated G.
This is an encore presentation of a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland from Monster Kid Radio 396 from 2018. Hello, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with your look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today's movie, Horror of Dracula, was first mentioned in Famous Monsters number 2, which celebrated 1958 as the Year of the Monsters. Monster fans never had it so good, with a magazine all your own and at least 1 million movies. Well, at least 75. The article went on to name those 75 films, including today's Hammer classic. Horror of Dracula made its next appearance in issue number 32 from March of 1965, as, of all things, a comic adaptation. It was presented by Jeff Jones and Joe Orlando, comic icons of the 60s and 70s, whose work can be seen in Mad, DC, Marvel, and the Warren horror comics. The story is told from Van Helsing's point of view and focuses on the beginning of the film, then briefly summarizes the middle section before the horrifying conclusion. This comic was reprinted in issue 50 from July of 1968. In Monster World number 9, also known as FM 78, from July of 1966, Horror of Dracula was featured in a photo comic. Almost identical in story to the comic version, it has actual photos from the movie rather than comic art. It does cover more of the middle section of the film, so it is longer than the comic version. In FM 98, from May of 1973, a speech given by the star of Horror of Dracula, Christopher Lee, to the Count Dracula Society was transcribed and printed. Here is what he had to say about the character of Dracula. I would like you to understand that I personally feel that the character of Dracula, and now we are really getting to the point of this whole society, has, over the years, unfortunately and for various reasons, lost its meaning and lost its impact. This is a great creation. This character is a great character, a heroic figure, a figure of tremendous strength, power, ferocity, and appeal. There are many things involved in Stoker's Dracula, and to a certain extent, we have been able over the years to bring them out. I do feel that what's been happening recently is a little unfortunate. I've made no secret of this at all in England, and I'm quite prepared to stand by it. Probably some of you in this room will agree with me there. It's a pity to get further and further and further away from the original idea that was in the mind of the author when he wrote it. I can only tell you that as far as I'm concerned, no matter what the vehicle may be or no matter what the story may be, I will try as much as I can, if I ever play it again, to be true to the spirit of Bram Stoker. And I am going to do it once more. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Last time, you'll remember, he got a stake through his vampire's heart. And that would have been the end of Dracula if this bunch of rotten kids hadn't raised him from the grave with their satanic invocations for Dracula AD 1972. And all they get for their trouble is a lot of fangs right in the neck. Welcome back, Dracula AD 1972, rated PG.
Count Dracula and his vampire bride, as the king of the undead. And the devil himself is exorcised. Count Dracula and his vampire bride, rated R.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
All right, listeners, we know this episode's a little late, and that's because our life is really hectic right now. You heard me talk about it during the intro of the show, so my apologies for bringing it up again, but I just want to say thank you to everybody who has supported us in our most recent venture over at AmericanHaunters.com. Talked about it at the beginning of the show, of course, but Beth, do you want to say anything real quick before we get into the movie?
I just also really appreciate our patience from our viewers and all the support from everyone that's contributed or shared our posts or told someone about it who then, told someone who contributed. We just really appreciate that, and we hope you all continue to tune in and stay along for the ride as we go on this crazy adventure. We have been a little preoccupied this last week with getting everything sorted and packed, and things have been crazier than a creature in a Cadillac.
Crazier than a creature in a Cadillac. I don't know. I like it. I think that's going to be a thing now. We need to use that more.
Crazier than a creature, like the creature, but yeah, the creature in a Cadillac.
That needs to be like a t-shirt or a bumper sticker or a coffee mug.
Ooh, a coffee mug. I like it.
I like that too. All right, but let's talk about what we're supposed to be talking about on this week's episode. This is week 3 of Nosferatu November, which means we're talking about another vampire movie. And this time around, I showed Beth her not her first, but her second Hammer film, Horror of Dracula, or Dracula if you're over in the UK. Horror of Dracula, the classic Hammer film featuring my man, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee, and a bunch of other really cool cats. And I was super excited to share this one with her. I kind of gave her a little bit of a breakdown of Hammer Film's history during one of our trips up and back down to Seattle this past week. So she knows a little bit about, what Hammer is and the structure and the fact that they shot a lot of it in the same building over at Bray Studios, the former Down place. And
I've seen The Mummy.
And you did see The Mummy.
Yeah.
So you kind of knew a little bit about what you were in for. And I love The Mummy, don't get me wrong. But when I think Hammer films, I think Dracula and Frankenstein. They're the quintessential Hammer franchises, the gothicness, the performances, the music, everything is there. You've got the dream team, Terence Fisher, director, James Bernard, composer, the actors, some people working behind the scenes, Bernard Robinson on set design. So cool.
I really enjoyed this one. For one thing, having Lee and Cushing in the same film is just phenomenal. And watching the twinkle in their eyes when they're playing off of each other is really great. But I also really appreciated this take on the Dracula tale. I read Dracula in early middle school, if not late elementary school for the first time. And I probably read it another dozen times before I was out of college because I just really enjoyed the writing and the tale and everything. All the pieces were there in this, but not necessarily in the order that we are accustomed to.
Kind of like a remix.
Yeah,
a remix of Dracula. Now, one thing that I didn't mention when we were talking about Hammer films, Jimmy Sangster was one of the main screenwriters for a lot of things that Hammer did. And he wrote an autobiography called Do You Want It Good or Do You Want It Tuesday? As far as... So that approach,
that's great.
The approach to script writing is very economical. Let's just bang it out and get it done. And I think when you have all the different puzzle pieces that make up a Dracula story, you know what needs to be there. Get rid of the pieces that you don't want to use, put the pieces in different orders, and just roll. And I love that approach, and I love that that's what Hammer did, not just with Dracula, but with Frankenstein as well.
Well, and I think you can see that works here, not only because they're trying to get it done, but when you have stars like Cushing and Lee that you know are going to make it their own to some degree anyway and are going to add their own special joie de vivre to the proceedings. You don't need to overwrite the thing. It doesn't need to have so many pages that you're cutting tons of things onto the cutting room floor. It really should be a fairly clean version, and then let the actors and the scenery creators and the set creators, two different things, indoor, outdoor, and the costume creators and the sound people, let them tell the rest of the story. Just make sure that we have the basic pieces in there. And although, I think I said right off the bat, oh, that's not who that's supposed to be. It was another, when they bring like Harker in instead of Renfield or anyone else, it was an interesting way to remix some of the things, reuse the names that we're used to, but not necessarily with exactly the same character type that we would have been used to.
Mm-hmm. This Van Helsing, this version of Van Helsing is my favorite Van Helsing. I love what we saw in the Universal films. And yeah, I know Van Helsing has been used even as recently as, was that 2004?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
With Hugh Jackman. And I know Van Helsing has been used on other things since then as well. But this is my favorite Van Helsing. This is Peter Cushing. You cannot go wrong with Peter Cushing. A man can do no wrong. I will watch him play a villain. I will watch him play a hero. I will watch him play a scholar. I will watch him play an action star. And he gets pretty active in this. And I love Cushing. I love Lee, but the Lee Cushing mix, I think, is what makes Lee his best.
Well, and for me, he plays a very smart Van Helsing. It's not just an action star. I kind of think that probably the reason they brought Jackman in to do the film in the early 2000s was he was, right off of all the Wolverine stuff, and he was this action star, and what they wanted to make was an action movie, which was basically just a vampire hunter movie. He really did not have a lot to do with the academic side of things, whereas in Horrors of Dracula, or Dracula if you're in the UK, Van Helsing is brilliant, and he's deducing things, and he's figuring out ways to outsmart the vampires. He doesn't just have really cool weapons.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Hugh Jackman version, the trailers made it look like Castlevania or Vampire Hunter D, that sort of thing. It didn't feel like the classic. And it was even directed by the guy who did the first two Mummy films, I believe. I think Steven Sommers did that. And it does have that vibe, that DNA is there. But this Van Helsing, Cushing's Van Helsing,
he feels like a professor.
He does, but he feels like a professor who goes out in the field and gets it done. Whereas the Van Helsing from the Universal films, very professor, very professorial, very in his office, not really going out and get it done. Those days are behind him. This guy can do it all. Cushing can do all of it, whether it's, giving a lecture or preparing an audio recording or working with Harker out in the field.
It's interesting that you like this version so much, because in a way he reminds me a lot of another professor action hero character that you are rather fond of.
Okie
dokie, Dr. Jones.
Really? Okay.
Well, think about it. Indy is a great professor. He can do the professor thing. He can lecture. He can help kids out when they have a question in the library, even if there's a motorcycle involved at the moment. But he can also go on these adventures and hunt down these things and take care of monsters and evil beings and stuff. So, you really love that sort of well-rounded individual. Doesn't surprise me that you like it on the monster side of things, too.
That's something I hadn't considered, that he's the Indiana Jones of Monster Hunt.
I think Indiana is actually the Van Helsing of archaeology, if you look at the dates, just saying.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. And it's something I hadn't really accepted or come to terms with, but I think you're probably right. There is a lot of that in there. And, part of it is, too, is that I just think Cushing is an amazing actor. There is a charisma to the man. I just want to hang out with him. I want to be around him, whether he is building a new body out of old body parts, or he's fighting Dracula, I want to be around him because he just seems like the kind of guy that would make me feel good to be near. So I want to watch movies with him. He just got a charisma about him. And he was kind of a nerd. I mean, he liked to paint little war figures. He basically played war games with himself.
Oh, like Henry Cavill.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cute.
Oh, yeah, he would have loved Warhammer. and gosh, can you imagine playing D&D with the guy? Oh, my gosh.
I do find it interesting that if you look at the release date on this, it's 1958. And if you look at how old Steven Spielberg would have been at that time, there is every chance he saw this movie and it may have influenced in some way his creative process.
Well, and Spielberg was not the only creator on Indiana Jones. There was George Lucas.
Absolutely.
Who cast a lot of Hammer stars as Imperial officers in Star Wars. So he was aware of that as well. Including Cushing, but not just Cushing. Not just Cushing, though. Not just Cushing. The guy that Vader chokes out.
Yes.
That's another guy who did some Hammer stuff. A lot of them did a lot of Hammer work.
Well, really, that whole group, Spielberg and Lucas and all of them, they were all the right age to have grown up on a lot of these monster movies and Hammer films.
Totally. We talked about this several weeks ago, actually, when I did one of the Fu Manchu movies with Scott Glancy. We were talking about how that movie had the big map and it wasn't a red line because it's a black and white movie.
Travel by Map?
Yeah.
I love Travel by Map.
And that was in there. There's a lot of things in that movie that felt like influenced Indiana Jones as well. And it makes me wonder, and I kind of want to do the research now, in all our free time, to see if Lawrence Kasdan, the original screenwriter for Raiders of the Lost Ark and all of those, looked at those movies as inspiration, and if you can find those bits that fed into that. That's not to say that this is an adventure movie. This has some moments of action, but it's a horror flick. It's scary. There's some pretty intense things happening. When we were watching the movie to begin with, it opens with that slow-moving camera through the castle, and then we get to the coffin that says Dracula, and then the blood splatters on it. You made a comment, something about, red paint anyone or something like that, which, it does look a little like that nowadays. But thinking back then, all the Dracula movies, for the most part, maybe not all of them, but most Dracula movies from back then, people were familiar with Bela Lugosi, which is a bloodless film for the most part.
That's true.
Lugosi never even has fangs.
And they definitely have them here. In fact, the first gal shows up and I'm like, it's got fangs.
Right? So to have the blood splatter is like this cue to the audience. You're about to see a Dracula story, the likes of which you have never seen before. On screen, anyway.
I know. I almost feel it needs like one of those, Society for Protection of People from Fear Warnings or whatever they're called. It's definitely a more intense film right from the go. But, you said it's not an adventure film, but I feel like in some ways it is. It is more adventurous. We do see people traveling to different locations. We have some great fights in areas and struggles and things. And especially with the guys, it's just really fun to see anybody try to fight Lee. Because he's so big.
Yeah. I mean, he was taller than I am. And I'm 6'4".
By a bit.
So, I'm thinking about it now, even though I just said it's not an adventure movie. But there are so many moments in it that are straight out of adventure stuff. The coach chase, when they're trying so desperate to catch up to Dracula that they break through the barricade to get there, and then the guy puts it back together and they break through it again. There are moments that are very action heavy, and I guess that's something that I hadn't really thought about with this movie, especially all the Hammer films. They're all, when I think about them, I think about the gothicness of it.
Sure.
I don't think about the adventure part of it, but that is a part of it. And Terence Fisher, the director, always called what he did fairy tales for adults, and fairy tales do have their fair share of adventure moments, or at least they can.
Well, and it is definitely a more grown-up movie. I know we were talking with some friends recently about these different movies and which ones people liked best or whatever. And Abbott and Costello. Was it Frankenstein they were talking about? or Meet Dracula.
It would have been Meet Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, yeah. And I'm thinking about those. And as much as, yes, there are vampires and Wolfman and mummies and Frankenstein's monster in those movies, there's a silliness and a lightness to them that make it clear that it's a perfectly acceptable movie for kids to go to that in that day and age. And I don't think this one is really for younger children. This is for, the older preteen to teens and adults, I really feel like.
I think so too, especially as the Hammer Dracula series continues. And you get this with the Frankenstein films as well, just Hammer in general. When they finally figure out what it is going to put the most butts in the seats, you start getting more scantily clad women, you start getting a little bit of nudity, that sort of thing, especially once you get into the 70s. You start getting, some toplessness, or maybe somebody's bare behind, that sort of thing, as things continue. But even this one, which compared to some of the later films in the mid to late 60s, it's a little bit more tame in terms of its sexiness, still has a sex appeal to it, which is something that a 9-year-old kid isn't going to respond to the same way a teenager would or a young adult would.
Absolutely. You talked about sexiness, and in some of the costumes, our female vampire right off the top, I really enjoyed her costuming. And actually, I enjoyed the costuming on all the women in this flick. I've noticed that in some horror films, monster films that are set in, say, the 1800s, there can be a tendency, although they try to stay with period clothing, there is a tendency to muddle decades together. And then there's also a tendency, particularly with the leading women, to give them a much more modern version of the hairstyle. Maybe they've got an updo with ringlets during a Civil War era flick, but it's also bouffanted at the front, which is not something that would have been done, and then you go, oh, it's the late 50s, early 60s, of course, this makes sense. So I really appreciated that this stayed truer to the time period in the costuming and makeup and hair and a lot of that. And it did feel like it drew directly from some of the descriptions in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Ooh, okay.
The cording on the very first dress that we see a female character in, the flowiness, but also just the cording and the way that her dress is put together in sort of an old Greek or Macedonian style, with, of course, those countries being directly southeast of Romania and Transnistria and Transylvania, where all of these tales typically originate from. That's very likely how someone who had been alive for hundreds of years or even thousands of years, might dress, in this simple folding of cloth and then using belts or decorative rope or string or ribbon to tie it into place, and therefore making it more adjustable and something that could be used over time. And this is really well described in Dracula, and so it was nice to see that description on screen in a faithful representation.
I haven't read Bram Stoker's Dracula since 9th grade. It has been
fair enough
decades for me, so I don't remember any of that. But I've seen so many Dracula productions on screen, both film and television. But I'd be curious to go back and reread Dracula now and maybe to have that experience again, where a lot of it will be new to me. This has been so long since I've read it, and really pay attention to those kinds of things. I would love to get you and Dominique together talking about wardrobe, especially when it comes to the women.
Ooh, that'd be so fun.
I know that's something that she really is passionate about, and I'm fascinated by it. I just don't know enough about it to have an intelligent conversation. I know that there was a woman by the name of Vera West who worked for Universal, who did a lot of their gowns and things like that. Kind of an unsung hero of Universal films, I feel like.
I'm aware of Vera, and I've
really,
I've looked into her past a little bit previously when I was doing costuming for my theater company and doing stage representations of some shows that she had done film versions.
There's not a lot of information about her out there. There's other people. I know that she kind of had a tragic end. I don't know off the top of my head who did a lot of the wardrobing for Hammer, for example, and whether or not they just had a department or they had one or two people in charge of that sort of thing. I don't know what was most efficient when it comes to wardrobe. So I just don't know. But I think one of the ways Hammer stands out is to have these amazing costumes, whether it's Cushing with the gloves or Lee with that amazing vampire cape, or the vampire women.
Well, and I wonder if in some ways, because you do have a very different size of studio comparing, say, Universal to Hammer Films, if in some ways not having a giant costume closet to pull from meant that they actually created costumes that were correct for the time period and place and character class and social status and wealth status and all of that. Whereas I know the temptation with Universal, and this is not just in monster movies, they have this problem across everything from rom-coms to musicals to everything. They want their directors, they want their costumers to reuse whatever's in the closet first and foremost. And so I think that's sometimes you see a lot of the mixing of ages and genres in costuming in shows. And that's why, because they've been told maybe you have a budget for the lead 4 or 5 characters, but everything else better come out of that giant warehouse or warehouses of costumes that they've already paid for. And you can have the best costume closet in the world. I certainly never have, but even when I had multiple storage units full of costume options, it tends to be a mend and make do approach rather than just actually sourcing or making what you need from scratch.
Well, and that's how you end up with Robin Williams and Mork and Mindy wearing a costume that was seen in 3rd season episode of Star Trek.
Absolutely.
You end up recycling. I also, though, wonder about the Hammer films. They're closer to the source. Whereas the Universal films, they were shot in California. The Hammer films are shot in England. If you're telling an English Gothic story, you're closer to the source and more likely to head down to some consignment shop and find something that can be modified that looks more geographically accurate.
Sure.
As opposed to somebody making something from whole cloth in Universal or classic Hollywood at all.
Well, and that's definitely something we see too in other movies where things filmed in England or other parts of the UK are more likely to have actual tweed, actual wool, the actual materials versus you'll see a lot of American films from that era where it was really expensive to ship that stuff over, and so you get like cotton that's been dyed with a plaid or silk screen printed with a plaid on it instead of an actual woven plaid. And it's not that, it's plaid, but it's not a plaid. If it's not the real thing and it doesn't move the same way and it doesn't react the same way when you gather it and sew it and do different things with it. So it is. I will give you that it's probably easier to find the authentic fabrics, and who knows, maybe even just digging stuff out of some attic and somebody's ancestor left stuff sitting around. I know there was a Making of Downton Abbey thing that I watched one time where literally they were pulling stuff out of the attic of the old house that they were filming at and using a few of the things. So I think you're right that maybe being over there made a difference as well.
What did you think of Michael Goff? Now, he's the guy that goes on the adventure with Van Helsing. What was your take on him? Because I don't think you have a lot of experience with him outside of the Batman movies. Am I right there?
That's correct. I thought he did a good job. I would have liked him to be a little more animated than he was at certain times, but it was also a character that I wasn't necessarily connected to already. You know, they use Lucy in a slightly different way in this movie, but having read the books and having seen several versions of Dracula in film and TV that are done more strictly to the book, there's a very particular way that Lucy's story played out. It played out differently here, but I already had a connection to her from all these other times. I did not feel that way as much about Goff's character.
This was the first thing that I'd seen him in outside of the Batman movies.
Okay.
So I knew him as Alfred from the Tim Burton Batman films. I wasn't really aware of his career, so I didn't know that he had done so much in genre stuff. Most of his genre stuff that I'm familiar, I've seen him in now. He's the bad guy. He is the hammy, chewing up the scenery bad guy. So to see him in this was my first exposure to him. So I was like, okay, I'm ready for him to be the hero and stuff. And then to see him in something like Horrors of the Black Museum or Conga and things like that, where he's clearly the villain, or Trog even. It's something else. I think he's okay. I kind of wish we could have seen an adventure with Van Helsing and Harker, though. I felt like the two of them.
I agree. And in the original Dracula, that would make a little more sense with how Harker is used in the plot line. I do wonder, though, I said he felt almost underplayed at times. I wonder if some of that is just going up against Leland Cushing, though. You can be one of the funniest comedians of the early 1980s, but if you're on a panel with Robin Williams, you'll likely not get a word in edgewise. So, it doesn't mean that you're not a good actor, or that you didn't do a good job. It just means that when you're standing next to two superstars, you get outshone sometimes.
And that's no slight on Robin Williams or Cushing or Lee.
No, not at all.
That's the energy they bring. I also wonder, too, now that I've said it out loud, and I think I might have brought this up before in other conversations on other older podcasts, I wonder if doing what they did with the Harker character was another way to signal to the audience that this is a different Dracula story. You think you know the story? Well,
Possibly.
Not really. Let's see what happened to Harker. Now what's going to happen? If Harker's not safe,
Yeah, anyone is up for grabs at that point. Definitely. You mentioned before the lack of teeth in Bella's movies.
Bela had no fangs.
There are definitely fangs here. I thought they were quite well done, honestly. Even when the actors were speaking with them in their mouth, they seemed to be able to talk around them without a problem. They didn't look fake. They didn't look like plastic teeth, you know, which can sometimes happen.
Hammer did have a habit of dubbing their actresses a lot of times. Usually, and not with the same performer. A lot of times they would overdub somebody because they didn't like the accent, or for whatever reason they wanted a different voice. But I don't know I can't remember if they did that in this one or not.
Well, if they did, it's a really well done dub because it lines up very, very well.
Sidebar, there is a Sherlock Holmes movie starring Christopher Lee in which he is dubbed.
Interesting.
It's a German production.
Oh.
And why they didn't just have him speak German or do his own German overdubbing, I don't know. It is so weird.
They dubbed his German.
Yeah, just to have him. It's just weird to hear a different voice coming out of that man's face.
What era do you know is that from?
I don't remember. I really don't remember. I know he was starting to get busier in Hollywood, though.
So post-World War II.
Oh, yeah.
It may actually be his accent. There can be a tendency for people who... I had this issue for a while when I was learning German in high school, and it was explained to me by one of the German students that I went to school with when I was in Germany as an exchange student, that when Westerners, particularly those without much of an accent themselves, so yes, you could have an American accent or even a British accent, but maybe not like a Scottish accent or a deep South American accent or something like that. Someone with a fairly, lean accent to start with. they'll learn to speak High German, and it sounds like a certain former chancellor of Germany that nobody wants to sound like, and you certainly wouldn't want the main character of your movie to sound like that, and therefore sometimes people get dumped.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the case here, but I know how proper and crisp his voice usually is, and that would tend to lend itself towards sounding like that certain other person that you definitely would not want to sound like. So
that's fair.
Or maybe they just didn't have any idea who they were dealing with. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? It's just he's got such an iconic voice, and even from the very beginning, my name is Dracula. Welcome to my castle. Whatever it is he says at the beginning.
I did find it funny that he just straight up was like, "Yo, I'm Drac. How are you?"
It's weird because, we know Dracula's the bad guy. He's the villain.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't say Dracula without thinking Lee, Lugosi, any of them, really, even Gary Oldman. It's Dracula. He's the bad guy. And the villagers all know. The people in town know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't go up to that castle. There's a reason why we've got
They made him walk the last 2 kilometers? That's a long way.
And there's a reason why they've got garlic flowers up. And Van Helsing calls him on it. It's like, I'm here to help. I see what you got going on here, and you know why I'm here. There's garlic around. You know that means there's vampires, right? I'm on your side. But
doesn't he ask him, like, what's with all the garlic flowers? And they're like, they're pretty. Shrugs. I don't know.
But still, Dracula's like, what's up? I'm Drac.
Yeah, he doesn't really hide it. Well, I didn't just mean that, like, he's not hiding who he is in that way, but the historical figures that are the basis for Dracula's a nickname. It's like
Son of the Dragon.
It's like
if you look
calling Caligula.
If you look
he's
at
Little Boots, that's not his real name. He's Germanicus. That's his real name. So it was interesting to me that Dracula himself was just like, I'm Dracula. How are you? Like, he's just owning it.
Yeah, if you look at like the Vlad Tepes stuff and everything, and whether or not that was really something that influenced Bram Stoker, I've heard both arguments. Yeah, agreed. Dracula translated is not a positive nickname.
No. Well, I know one of your favorite things with a lot of these movies is sound. So how do you feel this one stacks up in terms of score and sound effects and everything to others?
The score is phenomenal. It's iconic. It's James Bernard firing on all cylinders. This is the gold standard when it comes to Hammer film scores, is his work. I love his Frankenstein stuff, but it's his Dracula music that stirs my soul.
I know there were a couple of different times while we were watching it that I had goosebumps and the hair on my arms was standing up and really giving me that whoo feeling.
It's so good. I love that overly orchestral gothic sound that you get with so many of these movies that other movies that weren't Hammer were trying to emulate. And it just sounds like a poor copy or a poor imitation.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is so good. And I think that's why I feel like the Hammer Mummy movie probably isn't the best representation of what Hammer has to offer because it's missing that. The music in that is good. Don't get me wrong. It's fantastic. But it's not James Bernard. And James Bernard is just one of the masters. I still have not heard his version of the score that he did for Nosferatu. At one point, he did a version of a score for that. I'd love to watch that with that score. And I know it's out there somewhere. I just haven't taken the time to watch it or listen to it.
Sure.
Bernard did a ton of work for Hammer, not just the Dracula and Frankenstein stuff, but a number of other pieces as well. As much as I love pretty much every one of the Hammer Dracula films, and I am a big fan and proponent of the last two, Dracula AD 72 and Satanic Rites of Dracula, one thing those movies are missing are the James Bernard score. They're somebody else. And while that music is great, it's not James Bernard. Oh, well. But I do love it. And the version that we watched was a restoration done by the BBC several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That some footage had turned up at some point that needed to be restored and reincorporated. And there's still supposedly footage out there. There's some Japanese footage from a Japanese cut of this movie that spends more time with the disintegration of Dracula,
Okay.
but nothing overly gruesome.
Oh, I will say I have one small bone to pick with him, with Dracula, over his disintegration in this movie.
He should have disintegrated better, like he had control over it.
No.
Okay.
No, when he's disintegrating and he's on the floor, there's a shot that's a close-up of the hand that shows the hand starting to turn to ash and getting all gruesome and disfigured and everything. And then it cuts to a wider shot where, like, the last thing to go is his face, pretty much, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it cuts to a wider shot so we can see that his face is just starting to look a little bit different and change color a little, while, like, his legs and stuff have gone. And his hand is totally normal in that. And then it cuts in closer to his face, and now both the face and the hand are, like, completely gone, black and crumbling in half a second. And I felt like, oh, come on, guys. Really? Nobody caught that in the editing room? But other than that, it holds up pretty well. I like that we have the disintegration factor. I like that when another vampire that clearly has been a vampire for a considerable amount of time is killed or staked, that you don't just get a dead, beautiful young woman. She actually changes into the older looking woman that she really would be when she dies.
She ages appropriately. And there are some things, like you talk about the continuity between the cuts. The older woman corpse is clearly breathing.
Yeah, there was that.
There's a few bits here and there. And some of that just comes with the territory of making a movie that, yes, there was considerable money spent on it, but it wasn't a surefire deal with them at that point. The Dracula franchise wasn't a Dracula franchise yet for them. This is the first foray into this particular type of storytelling. So I'm willing to kind of let it go. And I don't think you're saying it ruins the movie. It just,
no. It was like I'm having to be that nitpicky in order to even find anything negative about it, because it's such a good picture and so well put together. Really well thought and planned out, I believe. If you look at how many of the details really add to the story and play into the story, I feel like there was a very clear plan for the set design and the scenery and costumes interacting with that. I had asked you at one point if it was black and white and then colorized.
I was just about to bring that up.
No.
I was just about to bring that up, yeah.
But it definitely has the feel, the colors that they tend to use, whether it's costumes or wall hangings or furniture, are quite intense. We see a lot of color play with things like a deep burgundy red with gold accents on it, with lighter gold or yellow accents on it. We see a lot of, you'll have like some dark blue, but then with glittering silver on it or something, to really play up the fact that we have color and kind of show off, I think, the fact that this Dracula's in color, And we talked about the blood being maybe just a little bit too red, which is partially why I thought maybe it had been colorized. From the skin tones to the costumes to the sets, it has a very Pantone color wheel feel to it. But maybe that really was just them making the most of the fact that they were shooting in color.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There were Hammer films that were coming out around this time, even after this, that they chose to do in black and white for whatever reason. So, I mean, it clearly was a choice. And a good choice. I mean, they wanted to spotlight, like I said, the red blood at the very beginning and the opulence of Castle Dracula.
Mm-hmm. I did like the way that it portrayed Dracula as kind of petty, almost in a way. He wants revenge. He doesn't just want compensation for something being taken from him. He literally wants revenge. He's willing to travel many, many miles. He's willing to put out considerable expense and really put himself in potential danger in terms of like he has to rest in his home soil. So going away from a home, he has to bring his coffin. He has to bring soil with him. If he leaves the coffin and then somebody gets a hold of it, what are you going to do? You know, type of thing. And yet he does all this to go after Harker's loved ones when Harker takes away his woman. So it's a more human Dracula in a lot of ways. It makes me believe more that this is a this is a vampire that used to be a human, and probably a spoiled one at that.
Dracula, this time it's personal.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
It does. It feels more personal. It feels less like I just need a bite to eat. And more like he's got a vendetta.
Yeah. The Vendetta of Dracula sounds like a great movie title. I'd watch that.
Well, there you go.
So somebody write that one. I want to watch it.
Maybe that's a book you need to write, and then I'll turn it into a movie. What do you think, Monster Kids?
Oh, boy.
Everybody get on here and tell Derek that you really want his next book.
Thanks, hon.
He's going to edit that out.
No, I'm not. I'm edit. This is very light edit on this episode. Very light edit, because we got to get this out because it's late. Speaking of it being late, let's wrap up. Any final words about Horror of Dracula?
I cannot wait to see the sequel.
So we are going to watch Brides of Dracula.
Love me some vampire brides.
Originally, we were going to do that next week. However, we are about to get on an airplane in less than 10 hours, and we got to get this episode out. So next week will not be Brides of Dracula. It'll be the Q&A with Zandor Vorkov from Monster Bash. I think I mentioned this at the end of the show as well. And then maybe the week after that, we'll do Brides of Dracula from Arizona. Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. I doubt there are a lot of vampires living in Arizona, that whole sun thing being a problem for them. I mean, they'd just be way too sparkly. No, I'm kidding. I am so kidding. I'm so kidding. I apologize. That was a joke. I know that vampires don't sparkle.
I was even going to make a comment about vampire. Like, I had a comment. Like, I was going to say, but there was a movie with this, but it's gone now. You ruined it. You ruined it.
Well, I hope that Brides of Dracula is as entertaining and spooky and spine-tingling as Horror of Dracula, because I just really had a great time, and I highly suggest, if you've not seen it, get a hold of a copy, watch it, and then tell us what you thought.
You'll meet her at night in a dark place. She's beautiful, and she'll be waiting for you, waiting to love you to death. New World Pictures presents The Velvet Vampire. She'll love you to death. And on the same bill, this second horror shocker, Scream of the Demon Lover. Was he a man, or was he the depraved monster resurrected from a grisly death to stalk the night with a loathsome craving which only the most unspeakable horrors could satisfy? You'll find out when you hear the Scream of the Demon Lover. It may be the last sound you hear. See The Velvet Vampire and Scream of the Demon Lover, both in shocking color, rated R. If you see them at night, don't walk home alone.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you for listening to the show. Thanks for checking everything out. Thanks for sharing posts on Facebook and Twitter, or I guess X now, or wherever it is you hang out online, your various social media outlets. Please consider sharing posts and just spreading the word of Monster Kid Radio. We're trying to grow the show. You know, we've been doing this for over 600 episodes, over 10 years, and we want to just grow. We want to keep the show moving and becoming bigger and getting more people involved. And, you know, the more the merrier. And really, us Monster Kids, we like to stick together and hang out and support one another. So let's do it through Monster Kid Radio. Another way you can support fellow Monster Kids is by buying their books. And I'm talking specifically about Stephen D. Sullivan. You should head over to sdsullivan.com and check out everything that he has on offer, including books like Cushing Horrors, Daikaiju Attack, Frost Arrow, Monos, The Projects of Fate, Tournament of Death, Luck of the Irish, White Zombie. Some really cool stuff over there. Stephen D. Sullivan's been a longtime friend of Monster Kid Radio and a longtime supporter of Monster Kid Radio. And, you know, I really, really think that if I had a copy of one of Steve's books with me when I was in the car today, driving to and from Seattle, it would have made the day pass so much quicker. And I probably wouldn't have this sore back, and my feet wouldn't have swollen up, and I wouldn't feel like I need a nap, even though I really didn't do anything but just sit in a car for 8.5 hours. I think maybe if I had one of his books with me, it would have been a smoother trip. No offense to Jeff, who was driving us, or Beth, who was there with me. I'm just saying, White Zombie will fix your back. No, I'm not saying that at all. I can't really say that, but can it? Only by buying the book can you find out. Anyway, check out stsullivan.com. Big thanks to Steve for sponsoring the show and supporting what we do here on Monster Kid Radio. You can find links to Steve's books over at monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find links to everything that we talk about here on the show, including Amazon links. We are an Amazon affiliate, so one way you can help support the show is if you're doing any shopping on Amazon, just use the Amazon affiliate link, because by doing that, well, you get to shop on Amazon as normal, but we get like a penny or two commission, and it really helps us out. It helps pay the bills. It helps put gas in the car. It helps with an oil change that I desperately need. It really helps out. So please consider shopping through Amazon, through the Amazon affiliate link. Just go to monsterkidradio.net. Look on the page for a Frankenstein monster silhouette with a big Amazon A in its middle. That's the button you're going to want to press. And then just shop as normal. What's coming up next week on the show? Well, courtesy of Mike Ramsey, we're bringing you a recording of a Q&A from a previous Monster Bash. In fact, there was just a Monster Bash last month. I've never been to an October Monster Bash, but based on the recordings that I always get from Mike, it sounds like I really need to figure out a way to get to one, because they sound like they have a blast. And last month, they hosted a Q&A with one of my absolute favorite Draculas. I'm talking about Zandor Vorkov, Dracula versus Frankenstein. I've listened to about half of the Q&A already as I've been going through and kind of cleaning it up a little bit, making it ready for the show. And it's fascinating, and I really want to meet Zandor someday. I need to make that happen. And he's been to Monster Bash a couple of times now, it seems like. So, you know, maybe someday in the future, he and I will cross paths, and I'll get a chance to meet one of my absolute favorite Draculas. And you know what? It's Nosferatu November. I want to celebrate Dracula versus Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite movies. I know. But I do love that film quite a bit. So I'm happy to share the Q&A with you next week here on the show. After that, well, technically there's one more Thursday in the month of November, so we'll see. You may get a guest host, but it'll be worth it. Trust me. Stay tuned to Monster Kid Radio, and, you know, you'll get Nosferatu to like everybody else. Is Nosferatu a verb? I think I just made it a verb, which means I'm probably tired and need to wrap this up. So, remember that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to the song Invasion from the Blood Planet. That is copyright 2023, Los Vampiros del Mar. It's from their album Songs of Blood, Death, and Romance. You can find that on their Bandcamp page, losvampirosdelmar.bandcamp.com. Let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you after you bought the album, of course. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.